Renowned director Anne Bogart reboots Bartók's only opera, Bluebeards Castle, for Boston Lyric Opera, teaming it with work by 19th century composer Alma Mahler. Staging the production inside a cruise ship terminal in South Boston, Bogart says her Bluebeards Castle is a psychological thriller and an immersive experience that rides the waves and plunges the depths of human emotion. Anne Bogart, such a pleasure to have you here.
I'm so happy to see you again. We met a couple of years ago.
We did. We had a public talk about Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Bluebeard's Castle. For people not familiar with this piece, it's a Duke Bluebeard brings his wife Judith home to his castle, the latest of several wives. Nothing good ever happens in a castle, I think we've learned. So go.
You know, I realized the other day, if you've ever seen either the movie or read the book Rebecca, it's the same story. You know, in the story Rebecca, this young lady meets a handsome man, falls in love. He seems perfectly fine. And they get married, they go to Manderley, which is a house on an ocean, and she finds out all the dark things about him. It's the same story, but it's also a story that's been told for hundreds, if not thousands of years. It's related to fairy tales, the Grimm's fairy tales, but not even just Eurocentric. There's Asian fairy tales. It's this preternatural story of a young woman who follows an older man and discovers his dark sides. And and then Bartók wrote this opera. It's actually his only opera, and it's a stunner. It's, you know, I'm not a musician myself, but I, of course, did a lot of research. It turns out that all the really big people in music say this is maybe the best opera ever written. Yes, I know. The music, they love it. The funny thing, though, is I listened to a interview with Esa-Pekka Salonen, the great conductor, who said, yes, this is his favorite opera, but of course in it nobody moves. And I laughed because our production has so much movement.
Well, I want to ask you about this. It's billed as an immersive psychological thriller. This is happening at the cruise ship terminal in South Boston. How are you using that space?
Yeah, you know, the first time I saw the space, BLO, Boston Lyric Opera, found it, and they said, come and look at it. So I drove up from New York City, and I walked in, and I saw this huge escalator with the words, "To the ship" on it. And I said, I'm in. because it was already an adventure just to go there. So you go up the elevator, and there's this vast space. So we're turning it into a journey for an audience, and you're invited into this tale through the four-song cycle of Alma Mahler. She was a woman who lived in the same time as Bartók in Vienna, and every man in Vienna was in love with her. And she married not only Gustav Mahler, but she had love relationships with Egon Schiele, the painter, Gustav Klimt, Kokoschka, basically every famous man you can imagine. People were obsessed with her. But the problem with her is that every time she got involved with a man, usually a famous artist, she sublimated her own work because the man didn't want her to. This seems so close to the story of Bluebeard. You enter into this relationship, and his toxic masculinity kind of kills her, literally. Well, we've turned this around, and I'm not going to tell you how, but you have to come and see, because there is a bit of revenge in here for the women in the way we're taking it.
Well, I will see and experience it firsthand. My tickets are already booked, and I choose the word experience very deliberately, and I notice the active verbs that you're using. What does it do for the audience to move through this piece and not just passively necessarily sit in seats and take it in?
You know, I think this has to do with COVID, but I have a dear friend named Leon Inglesrud, who's a part of my company, and post-COVID he went to see a play, and I said, how was it? He said, not so good. And I said, why? And he said, well, the actors never said hello to the audience. And I thought, that's so interesting that we live in a time where we need to feel part of the experience. It's not literally that an actor has to look at an audience member and say, hello, I'm glad you're there, but to feel included. And the idea of something behind glass or something that's removed or the fourth wall right now doesn't work. And so we've created an experience where the audience is enveloping and we're enveloping them in this story and this glorious music.
You must give me all the keys now. You must give me all the keys now. I must open every door. Tell me, Judith, why you want this? Because I love you.
And I think this aspect of male-female sexuality, which I think is endlessly interesting.
Well, I want to switch gears for a second. In your book, The Art of Resonance, you write about something that it occurred to, you made me feel better about myself, actually, because you write about so many people walk away or can come up to you and they can tell you about something specific they saw in theater 30 years ago, or they can recite whole passages of books. I am not somebody who can do that, and you talk about this in your book, that we almost feel that there's some responsibility to have our memory so acutely aware and sustained after experiencing the performing arts or reading. But why don't we need to do that necessarily?
The Art of Resonance, which is a book I wrote over COVID. But it started when I learned that neuroscientists say that memory is actually a protein. Now I'm going to speak it in far too simplistic terms, but that memory is created, like strong memories are created through emotion. And the heat of the emotion creates an action in the brain that actually creates a protein in the brain. And so when you remember something, there are synaptical activities that go to re-meet that protein. And of course, as we know, the act of remembering changes the memory every time. But the thought that actually what we do in the theater or in the opera is our job is to create memories. You know, how many times have you gone to see a show and you walk out and you've already forgotten it? Yeah. What about those times when there's something about something you saw that haunts you still? I would say that is a successful production. So that the success of a production depends on the amount of literally proteins in the audience's brain that you've created through an interaction with what you've presented. So that seems pretty noble to me, you know. So memory, you know, is actually the resonance that is set up in the body, is created by the heat and the goosebumps that you get from having an experience.
I can tell you my most specific memories in the theater have been the times I've cried. There haven't been very many of those times, maybe 2 or 3.
That's heat, and that's certainly resonance. And, you know, actually the same person I mentioned earlier, Leon Inglesrud's mother had Alzheimer's, and I had always said, oh, theater is about remembering, to remember something, to put it back together again. And he said, what about people who don't have memories? And I thought, I had to think about it because it's a good question. I thought, actually, I read a lot, but if you asked me today about a book I read last week, I've probably forgotten the title. I've forgotten what I learned from it. But what I realized is while I was reading, something happened. Tears welled up, or something changed in me. So it doesn't matter so much maybe that you remember specifically. I'm contradicting myself now about memory, but that it sets up a resonance which changes the chemistry of the body. It's huge, right?
It's epic, and you put the science behind something that has concerned me about myself for so long. Well, it is always a pleasure to speak with you. I just love my time with you. Anne Bogart, thank you.
Such a pleasure, and thank you for your excellent probing questions.